Welcome everybody to the live planning board meeting this Wednesday, July 21st, 2021. First up, we've got a roll call. We are missing Dave Thompson this evening, but we do have John Beckett. We've got Mike Costello, myself, Phil Ruck. We've got Judd McIntosh. We've got Lisa Butt, Krista Schwintzer, and Bob Bear. Welcome to your first meeting, as well as you. We got to see you last time, but this is your first full meeting, so welcome everybody. We appreciate you helping out the town. So next up is an acceptance of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second. Thanks, Mike. John, any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the agenda? Yeah, I don't have to ask you to do roll.
That is benefits.
Yeah. Next up, approval of the minutes of May 19th, 2021. Another extremely thorough job, Jessica. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Very good.
Second.
Motion second. Any discussion, edits?
I have one edit.
Very good.
Okay. On page 3, near the bottom, just above the last line before the items 1 and 2. That line reads map 10, lot 19 in commercial 1 district with 2 recommendations. I don't think we're recommending these things. I think they're conditions.
Duly noted. I'll fix that.
That's it.
I've got a couple.
All right. Cool.
Page 3, just above the paragraph that says Judd McIntosh. Second line of that paragraph should be from instead of form. And then on page 2.
Yep.
Fifth paragraph. The store will occupy and we type in and, looks like spell check, put a D in it.
Oh, I see. So it should be and
Yes,
not
I think so,
and.
yes, what it
Okay.
looks like. I think that's it.
We'll
That's
search
it
that
for
out.
me.
Thank you.
Other comments? Edits? And so that's our discussion. So I guess all those in favor of approving the minutes with those changes. Thank you, Chris. Next up, new business. We have 3 public hearings this evening. First one is a minor site plan review for Joe Sprecher, located at 163 Gould Road, tax map 6-3, lot 5, in the Forest and Agriculture District and Limited Residential Shoreline District. The application is for the addition of 98 cubic yards of gravel and 70 cubic yards of topsoil, as well as the creation of a driveway and parking area within the shoreline zone. I see Mr. Sprecher is over there. Joe, could you give us a summary of, I think you're going to be stepping up to the microphone, and Jessica reminded us to.
It's fairly simple. It's just my driveway area. And we had gotten building permits last year, June, I guess it was. And we put in gravel and leveled it all out. And then shortly thereafter, our neighbors appealed our building permits with the town of Orono. The appeals board went through, they had attorneys, whatever, deciphered that the conclusion was that the code enforcement hadn't done their role of delineating the shoreline zone. And we had roughly estimated where the shoreline zone area was. We didn't pay for a surveyor at that time to do it. So throughout this process of the last year, we've had a surveyor do a full site plan. You all hopefully got a copy of, because we've got a whole bunch of copies and so on. Anyhow, the none of it is the gravel that was being requested was done last year. So that was already done on this while we had a permit. And then the permit was appealed. And then we're trying to figure out, working with code enforcement, how do we fix this? I said, well, once we determined exactly what the area was, the only thing we did wrong was put too much of gravel down because it made it impervious surface. So the solution would be to put grass on top of that. And so we're putting grass on half of it. And we need dirt to put the grass. One thing new we need is dirt, and we're going to seed it and have grass. and leaves us with about 7 spaces as laid out on the plan. So, are there any questions?
We'll get back to that. Maybe
Okay.
have Kyle add to that. Kyle, you also provided us a review. So for your benefit, town staff does an awesome job helping us summarize what we're reviewing. So that it's very helpful. It's streamlined that process since this has been going on. So typically I'm going to ask the applicant to come up and say something, and then Kyle usually weighs in on any other issues. So that's the process.
So just to expand a bit, yeah, so the original permit for the 98 cubic yards of gravel would have, when you look at it from a bringing in amount of material, 98 cubic yards would just require a permit, but our shoreland ordinance does require that parking areas receive planning board review for certain things to look out for in the shoreland, impacts on waters and things like that. More look at erosion control and erosion and sedimentation control. And one of the big things that the appeals board found throughout that process, that Mr. Sprecher had alluded to, was that there wasn't an indication, a formal kind of on paper indication through the building permit that a standard in our shoreline ordinance requires that not more than 20% of a lot or a part of the lot that's within the shoreland area is unvegetated surface. And it had, been found out after the fact that gravel parking area would have gone over that 20%. So what we did is the applicant had these 2 back lots across from their house. So those 2 lots were combined into 1 lot. And what that allowed is for more total acreage or total square footage in the shoreland area. And that would allow for more amount of the parking area to be within that shoreland area. But then the remaining kind of percentage that need to be knocked down back over to vegetated is now proposed on the plan to be brought some soil in and then seeded with grass. It meets, sort of all of the dimensional requirements of parking areas, as far as there's that 10-foot vegetated buffer area marked on the plan before the kind of parking space area begins. It's well over 5 feet setbacks from side and rear property lines, which is a requirement for parking areas. So yeah, as far as erosion control, which was another item that the appeals board had sort of looked at and considered in their appeal of the original building permit, because again, there wasn't anything formally written down and submitted with the building permit application. The applicant has provided a statement that they're in receipt of the main DEP best practice guide for erosion control, as well as they will be obviously seeding the new soil area that they're bringing in, which will stabilize that soil. But in the meantime, they have worked with our code officer, Pat Esty, as far as what sort of erosion control measures need to be taken place in the meantime. And that was, there should be an email in your packet with a little bit of a correction that I sent afterwards that talks about an erosion control berm on that western side of the north property line. That's the property line that faces the lake, and that's just to prevent any of that soil from going towards the water area. But overall, the parking area is level, and existing water flow and drainage should remain on site and not impact any of the surrounding lots.
And Joe, you received a copy of that email with the
Oh,
erosion
yes,
control?
oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, this is,
even at the appeals board meeting, it's again, packet, gone through. This is a level piece of land. Your own guy, your public, Rob, Rob was out there too. I know Kyle spoke with him. I don't know, get feedback from him. He was out there last year. I think he went there again this year. It's just level land. I mean, prior code enforcement, as you know, we've been through Bill Murphy and then Mike stepped in and now Pat. It's sad that we know all these people. And but anyhow, it's a level piece of ground. And the only thing Pat said is it puts some mulching over by those rocks. There's not even any silt fencing required. This is level. This is across the road from the lake. This is in the back part of a 250-foot shoreline zone. It's not on the water at all. There is what separates our house behind our home is a cul-de-sac at the end of the road. So it's got this long, wide cul-de-sac area that's probably 75 feet wide, and then our parking area beyond that. So it's just a level piece of land.
Yeah, so I would add, yeah, the shoreland area is generally defined as 250 feet from the normal high water line. And the start of this lot is roughly, I think, 180 feet away. So it is out of that initial 100 feet to the water is where there are more requirements for DEP permitting and some stricter standards start applying to removal of trees and vegetation. But you know, as this is kind of in that back 70, 80 feet of the shoreland and then moving outside of the shoreland area, there aren't quite as many concerns there.
I'm not sure if you all saw that, but the 250-foot setback is marked out pretty clearly in the plan. All right. Before we open up for public hearing, any further questions from the applicant? This isn't after the fact.
I have two questions for Kyle, actually.
Yeah.
The first is, so he's merged these two lots. I'm assuming that if I, as a property owner, went to the assessor and said, hey, I've got these two lots next to each other, combined, they're conforming, you would do it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So that's a standard operating procedure.
Yeah, that's a choice that's open to any property owner with contiguous lots.
Okay. And so second is, because I think this is the first Board of Appeals.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
really can't remember any.
15 years or whatever it's been.
Yeah.
We're approving. I wanted to know exactly what we're approving. Are we approving that, oh, if you bring in the soil and plant the seed, now you are okay? Or if we say no, what's the consequence of that? If we don't approve it, what's the consequence? Because you have to rip all the gravel up and then bring in topsoil and plant the seed? Like I'm trying to.
Right, there would have to be some other measure taken to correct a violation of having, you know, done that without having approval. So what this is basically doing is there was an initial permit, it was overturned. So at this point, it's the planning board review is because this should have gone to the planning board in the first place. So a means of correcting the original permit and being overturned is to just go through this process. It's the only way to approve it going forward.
So essentially saying if we approve this, that it does now with these steps conform to the ordinance.
Right.
Understood.
And that's why the vegetation piece of it had, the revegetation piece had to be added in. Because without that, if it just came to the planning board with the initial gravel area,
Yeah,
it wouldn't meet the ordinance
Right.
and the planning board couldn't approve it.
Other questions? I'm going to open up the public hearing then. Got it home too. To open up the public hearing, anybody in the audience can just step up to the mic. Please state your name and if you have concerns, support, or opposition. So while that's going on, can we check? Well, is Avi just gonna let us know? How's that gonna work?
Avi, if you can hear us, are there any public comments or raised hands in the chat?
No questions here.
Okay, we're gonna leave the hearing open for just a little bit. Again, seem fairly straightforward. nice that this is rectified so that it will be a conforming use now, and the efforts to restore, revegetate those areas. That's a good thing. I didn't really have any other main concerns.
The only other piece I'd add is that the condition, there should probably be a second condition added to my, the report that I had provided that just states officially with the final decision that the erosion control measure as recommended by the code officer will be. So I think I'll let go.
All right, Avi, last call.
No questions here.
Very good. I'm going to close the public hearing. Do we have a proposed, again, these are just proposed findings of fact. All right, I'm going to go through all of these, and then we're going to ask whether you have any issues. We're going to knock them all out. So these are proposed findings of fact for Joe Sprecher site plan review dated July 21st, 2021. Again, these are for consideration of just new members. The findings of fact, Kyle prepares these in advance, and these are just proposed. So this is not set in stone. So while we review each of these criteria, we can weigh in and change as needed. So and more process stuff. Pursuant to Article 6, Section 18-177 and Article 9, Section 18-275 of the Orono Code of Ordinances, the Orono Planning Board has considered the application of Joseph Sprecher for the creation of a parking area in the shoreline zone in an earth-moving activity located at tax map 6-3 lot 5 in the Forest and Agriculture District and Limited Residential Shoreline District. And based on all evidence presented by the applicant, reviewing agencies, town departments, and the public, found the following. Number one, requirements of the district that the parking area is an allowable use in the Forest and Agricultural District and Limited Residential Shoreline District. Number two, compliance with town ordinances and codes that the proposed use meets the provisions of applicable regulations of the town, including all pertinent sections of Chapter 18 Land Use Ordinance. Number three, utilization of the site, that the proposed use reflects the natural capabilities of the site and that no buildings are proposed and environmentally sensitive areas will be avoided to the maximum extent. Four, traffic and pedestrian access, that the proposed use is a residential parking area designed to accommodate a single-family dwelling and will not generate any traffic beyond that of the residential use. Number five, storage of materials, that there will be no exposed storage of materials. Number six, stormwater management, that the existing water flow is not proposed to be changed and any stormwater runoff will be kept on site due to the level topography of the site. Number seven, erosion control, that the applicant has provided an erosion control plan for the addition of the soil and that Maine DEP's best management practices for erosion and sediment control will be followed. Number eight, water supply and sewage disposal, that the site does not require water supply or sewage disposal. Number nine, utilities, that the proposed use does not require any utilities. Number 10, natural features, that the proposed use will involve the revegetation of a portion of the existing gravel parking area, which will meet the ordinance requirement for the allowable amount of unvegetated area within the shoreline area. Number 11, groundwater and surface water quality protection, that the proposed development and use will not adversely impact the quality or quantity of groundwater available to abutting properties or to public water supply systems. Number 12, hazardous, special, and radioactive materials, that the proposed use does not involve the handling, storage, or use of hazardous, special, or radioactive materials. 13, shoreline relationship, that the site is within the limited residential shoreline district and that the proposed use is in conformance with the requirements of Section 18-274 of the Land Use Ordinance and will not result in water pollution, erosion, or sedimentation to surface waters. 14, solid waste management, that the proposed use does not require any solid waste management. 15, historic and archaeological resources, that the site is not known to contain historic or archaeological resources. 16, financial capacity, that the applicant has the financial capacity to carry out the project. And last, number 17, noise and lighting, that there are no proposed lighting additions and there are no proposed activities that would fail to meet the noise standards stated in the ordinance. With all of those proposed findings, are there any issues with any one of them? No issues. I think we are ready for a motion.
I had a question first. So for the second piece, recommendation on the erosion control, there's these two artifacts, right? There's the one where he essentially says, acknowledge I've received it and everything, and then the email outlining some stuff, right? So I can just say, and follows the erosion control guidance by the Orono code enforcement officer. Is that adequate?
Yeah, I think that's the piece that should be, because it wasn't submitted in as part of the application, so
Okay, that's, I just want to make sure I have to get into more detail than that.
I think that's fine.
So I propose that we approve the site plan application by Joseph Sprecher for the creation of a parking area in the shoreline zone and an earth moving activity located at tax map 6-3 lot 5 in the Forest Agricultural District and Limited Residential Shoreline District, with the two recommendations. One, that the applicant obtains all necessary building permits from the code enforcement officer prior to bringing in the additional materials. And second, follows the erosion control plan outlined by the Orono code enforcement officer.
Which, thank you, Judge. I have a second.
Second.
Very good. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Very good. Moving on, our second public hearing for this evening is a contract zone request by Garrett Randolph and Dara McIntyre to create a contract zone for 163 Forest Avenue, tax map 18 lot 6, to change the zoning of the lot from low density residential to economic development zone to allow for a medical office, counseling office within the existing structure on the lot, and to include other restrictions which would limit the scale of the development on the lot to that consistent of the surrounding area. Could the applicant please step up to the podium and again, please speak toward the microphone.
Thanks for having us, and I appreciate that. Garrett's our better.
Can you make sure you speak
Into the, a little bit louder.
so
Sure. Okay.
that mic isn't on, so it has to be picked up by this one.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Sure.
So we're fans of Orono. We like being here. We're raising kids here. And we met at Humane in grad school. And we've worked a lot of different places in the counseling profession. And some of them in some ways didn't really meet our expectations or our ethics. We practice, for instance, prioritizing money or client care. And so we always had this dream of having our own, opening our own counseling center. So we've been looking hard, where could we do this? And one of the appeals for us, we wanted to be close enough to Orono and Bangor where people could access us easily, the university. But we wanted a sense of sanctuary, a sense of safety. Some people don't want to go to counseling, downtown or, where somebody drives by and sees your car. And, oh, there's Joe at counseling. And so we love the site at Forest Avenue because of that, because of nature all around, sort of this sense of privacy and beauty. And we also thought, because there's woods all around, you can't really see your neighbors. So we thought that would be good as well. We don't handle stream diagnoses, a diagnosis that should be at Acadia where Dara works. One of her jobs now is at Acadia, has been there 7 years. And so Acadia handles people in crisis and things that we wouldn't necessarily handle.
We also, just to add to that too, we wouldn't be seeing sex offenders or people mandated by the court to come see us. there's an outpatient facility in Bangor that does that already. So we wanted to share that so that, you know, we're not seeing people in extreme situations. This is kind of just, you know, your run-of-the-mill depression and anxiety, people that just need someone to talk to, work through the problem.
And we've had a lot of guidance from Kyle, from Dave Milan, from Pat Estes and Rob St. Louis have really kind of guided us in this process. We've had a wetlands biologist out there do a whole survey and all kinds of things. So, and we want this to be we don't want it to be big, we want it to be low key, but we want it to be top notch. We're not looking for notoriety or anything like that, but when you hear about us, our hope is that you hear that it's really good. They do great work there, et cetera. So that's what we're considering some other people who might work with us, but we just want a certain standard here. And we might work with, we both work with teenagers and adults, whether or not we would hire somebody who's specified in children. We love children, but you can't really do everything at once in your work. So that's what we do. The term medical is kind of a little strong, where, you know, it sounds like a medical office. We'll be a counseling office, but we want to check all the boxes in that regard. But I just wanted to say a little about why we chose that site. We wanted to be close enough, but have some sense of sanctuary, privacy, and beauty. I'm repeating myself, so I've probably said enough. We would probably have one sign that just says Orono Counseling on the street, not anything big, but just.
And
Yeah.
some of our clients are seeing through telehealth, so not everyone is actually coming to the building. We have clients that live an hour or two away too, so not everybody would be directly coming to Orono. So, you know, if that makes a difference or not, but there wouldn't be a huge flow of people coming in and out. As I said, it would just be the both of us to start, and slowly we'd add one or two more. But we want to be selective and mindful of that and have people that have a good reputation.
I wouldn't share this normally, but because the town is considering us, we graduated in the top of our class. So we want to be really good at this. We don't want to just kind of be okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Kyle, you have a prepared summary again for us?
Yes. So just to kind of briefly recap the contract zone process, especially for new planning board members. The planning board's role in a contract zone request is like its role with an ordinance amendment to provide a recommendation to the town council to make the final decision. So in this case, this lot is currently located in the low density residential district, which by the name of that district, the intent is pretty obvious. It's mostly a residential area on, you know, larger lots. Some of the lots in this stretch of Forest Ave are, you know, even bigger than what your typical kind of residential neighborhoods that you find in some subdivisions in the low density residential district. For instance, you know, the lot that we're looking at here is over 12 acres. You know, the existing use was a 2-family home with a garage. I think the biggest thing that we looked at and considered initially with the town council and getting their just sort of initial opinion on whether to pursue this or not was the kind of uniqueness of the site. So there are a lot of wetlands, and the back sort of that southwest kind of quarter of the lot is mapped as significant wildlife habitat. So when we went to the council, we kind of talked about how this lot was on the market, I think, for about a year. And we got several calls from people interested in purchasing it and developing it with uses that would fit in the low density residential. They would be normally allowed, but people were interested in putting more two-family homes there, or like a condo style cluster development, things like that. But because of the sort of natural conditions of the lot, it was never feasible for people wouldn't be able to put in the number of units that would have made it financially, I think, worth it for them. So when the applicants, came forward with the idea, as far as wanting to keep a smaller scale counseling office, while the use itself wasn't allowed in the low density district, it did seem to fit within the scale of what the low density district is generally going for. So then we started to look at the surrounding area. That's usually an important thing to consider with any contract zone, is how it's going to fit in with the surrounding area. So right across the street, you have the Kiwanis, which is also not a residential use. To the right, you have the interstate. Sort of across the interstate, you have a church. Behind the lot at 163 Forest, you have some resource protection shoreland area, which would basically be undevelopable at any point going forward. And then beyond that, you have some economic development zone. So really, the only surrounding residential property is directly abutting on the western side of the lot. And if you look at some of the satellite imagery that was provided, you can see that there's substantial setbacks on both of those properties, and it's largely wooded area, so those structures wouldn't really come into play where it's abutting and right on top of each other. So then we start to look at the comprehensive plan and how any zone change has to meet the sort of goals of the comp plan. There are a couple of things outlined that I put in the report that talks about sort of assuring blocks of open lands at different settings and scales that support a variety of wildlife. So I think, in relation to something like this, where the proposal is to, stay within that existing proposed structure and not encroach any more development on the significant wildlife habitat area on the lot. Comp plan talks about extending the EDZ district boundaries to selected adjacent parcels. While this isn't directly, probably, there'd be that kind of buffer with that shoreland area. It's fairly close to an existing economic development zone. And Forest Ave, it's a bigger street. It's not your typical kind of residential subdivision in the low density district. And finally, the comp plan recommends contractor conditional zoning as a general tool in these unique circumstances. Which we sort of felt that there was enough there that kind of spoke to the unique aspect of this lot. So then if we go to the actual draft contract itself, most of the town's contract zones have sort of the same template and the same general standard language. It's really the first section, and when you get into permitted uses at the bottom of page 1, and then mostly onto page 2, and is where you get to the unique performance standards and restrictions that are basically put on the lot. So it's saying that, yes, the zone can be changed from low density residential to economic development zone. However, the only allowable uses on the lot would be a medical office building within that existing structure, and maybe a couple 100 square foot expansion if that was ever desired, with that 2,500 square foot number. But beyond that, no other economic development uses would be allowed. So, the economic development zone allows all sorts of large scale commercial and industrial uses like self-storage facilities, warehousing. Those sorts of things would never be allowed on this lot going forward. It would continue to just be either low density residential uses or this medical office use, which is from an ordinance standpoint, we define it as a medical office, whether it's a counseling office, a dermatologist, whatever kind of office it is. So then moving on to the dimensional requirements, obviously the low density district and the economic development zone have different sorts of dimensional requirements. And for instance, multifamily housing is allowed in the economic development zone at a certain density, while that's not allowed in the low density district. So as well as like single family attached housing, like a condo style development. So not only did we want to make the uses match more alongside the low density residential side of things, but also the dimensional aspect as well. And that way, if Dara and Garrett ever sold the property and the contract zone still, it goes with the land, not with the property owner. If that contract stayed in place and someone wanted to develop the lot ever residentially, they would still have to abide by those low density standards rather than the economic development zone standards. And then for getting into some additional performance standards, as it mentioned, probably be interested in a single sign. So there's a standard in there that proposes allowing signs as are generally allowed in our residential areas. So maintaining that kind of smaller scale, up to 24 square feet sign versus in a commercial district, you'd be allowed up to 300 square feet. Off-street parking requirements, the site kind of does have a long driveway and some existing gravel parking areas that were outlined on, I think, one of the images as part of the application. So the contract would recommend, continuing to use just that existing parking area and not expanding that any further, and having a limit on 15 parking spaces. And this is kind of consistent with the same sort of standards that we have in the Stillwater Avenue Overlay District and with our home businesses, other places where you start to allow some level of commercial activity in a residential area, but you want to put some sort of limit on the number of people that can come to the site, so that the kind of character of the area doesn't turn completely away from their residential nature. And we sort of, I think, worked out, if they were to have an extra employee or two, and then they were all seeing a patient and you had a couple maybe waiting, for their next appointment or something, that 15 space mark would happily, kind of meet the demand for parking at one time. And I think other than that, then it just goes back to kind of that stock template contract zone language that we have. So I think that pretty much covers everything from our side of things, but happy to answer any questions that people have, or it's obviously open as well for any recommendations on things that were not considered so far in the draft agreement.
I just have a point of probably curiosity. And that is in the boilerplate that follows. It refers to that if they break the agreement, the town can take them to court and the neighbors can take them to court. Is that standard, and why would, and how would this play out? How would the neighbors take them to court?
Can you point to which paragraph you're looking at, which number paragraph?
3A and B, page 3. B is the owners of parcels of land. So A says the town can take them to court. B says their neighbors can take them.
So I think there would, shall at any time violate or attempt to violate, or shall admit to perform or observe any one or more of the foregoing restrictions. So there would have to be some sort of official notice of violation, I think, from the town that they were not meeting one of the standards of the ordinance, which I think would then be the same as if any other development project had a site plan review and it was found that they weren't meeting the standards that the planning board approved, and a notice of violation was issued and it wasn't corrected.
Answer your question?
Yeah, I was just sort of surprised to see that language in there and was wondering,
I can certainly,
how it works, and that's,
Yeah.
and if it's boilerplate, it's been there forever, but maybe
Yeah.
it's time to look at it and see if.
it is the language in all of our contract zones. This was reviewed by the town attorney. I can specifically, though, moving forward, he'll review the final draft of the contract. If it's it certainly can be a recommendation of the board to just look at that piece of it and kind of get some follow-up feedback from the town attorney.
Yeah, find out, maybe he has a good reason why it's there.
Yeah.
I appreciate you raising the point, because as we read it, we did the same, almost the exact same reaction. And sort of thought, well, what if, we did all this work and then we kind of worked it through and just decided that it'll be okay.
And our
There's a
goal,
reason it's there.
I say our goal is to be a good neighbor, not to
Yeah.
provoke or push the boundary at all. Just want to say that.
Our nearest neighbor is here. You want to make sure she gets her question asked.
Yeah.
I tried to answer.
Yeah, we will open up for public comment shortly. Another question. So I looked at your summary, Kyle, and we talked about, the maximum. So if there's 4 employees and they're each seeing 1 patient, mentions 8 people. And then you said maybe you've got a couple people waiting outside. 15 spaces seemed excessive to me in a residential setting. So obviously I know the gravel's existing, so they're not creating any new spaces, but 15 cars in a residential setting just seemed excessive. And in my mind, we have, just those of you that have been on the board for a bit, remember we had one of these, was it in Falstaff? There was another home occupation, a similar counseling service, but it was limited. What's that?
Grant Road maybe? Or-
Yes, it's something like that. I remembered it was kind of a similar description for their services, but much fewer parking spots. So that was just
That was in a neighborhood.
That was officially a home business. So
Okay.
with a home business,
Yeah.
the parking spaces are very limited to
Yeah.
no more than 4.
No,
Whereas,
I knew that,
Yeah.
but I'm just still, to me, 15 just seemed a little excessive.
so I can say that I arrived at that number basically from, we looked at the existing parking area and
Mhm.
tried to look at how many cars you could, meet the required, space dimensions, and kind of worked out in that existing area, how many cars you could comfortably fit.
Right, but just because there is the
Right,
space,
sure.
I'm not sure that you need to occupy all that
Sure.
space. Just a thought, is there any concern with parking spaces? It's just the 2 numbers, 8 maximum people and 15 seemed a little much, but
I just because the lot, there's
Yeah.
12 acres there. I think if
Yeah.
it was in a neighborhood or something, they have to do more, or we probably wouldn't be having this conversation anyways if it was in a neighborhood.
yeah,
They had 4 counselors
Yep.
and each of them had a customer, a consumer. They could actually be coming in 2 vehicles.
could be, yeah.
Yeah, if they're doing couples counseling at all.
What's that?
If they're doing couples
Yeah.
counseling, often the couples want to be in.
Yeah, you're right, yeah, okay, yeah,
Especially when they leave.
yeah. Yeah, I'm not dead set on this. It just seemed like a lot for a residential setting.
I would say that, and, so for instance, the square footage of the business aspect at 2,500 square feet, that's the
Yeah.
same amount as the Stillwater overlay, which is,
Yeah.
the Stillwater overlay is also in the low density residential district, so where I thought, that made sense. The number of parking spaces allowed in that overlay is 10. So, yeah, there is some, I think, precedent for looking at a slightly lower number.
Mhm.
But yeah, the 15 was really more arrived from working out the existing parking area.
Do you think you'll ever have 15 cars in that space? I'm just curious.
Not, it could happen, but not usually, not usually be not many at all, or not even near that number, but could it ever happen, if we had, probably not.
Probably not, probably more like 10.
Yeah,
Because sometimes we would offer group therapy and there'd be a small group, 8 or so. That's a perfect size for a group, but so close to 10, but I don't foresee 15.
yeah. This site actually was owned by the Beatons that owned the hardware store in town back in the day.
Parks Hardware.
Yeah, and so it's really a beautiful site. I mean, it has a beautiful 3-car garage, and so they had landscaped it very carefully. So, but I assumed that somebody liked bringing their whatever vehicles they had in there.
Yeah.
There's some places where it used to be gravel, and now it's kind of gravel with grass growing on the gravel. So we may need to address that, or just make sure it's either get the grass off it or make sure it's gravel instead. Because the grass is on top, or we'll just wear it down. But some of it it's just sat there for years, so some of it's kind of grown back to the grass. But it's a beautiful site. That's
Welcome
a
to
nice
come
place.
visit.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of work on the inside to get it up to speed, so you're always welcome to stop by and we'll give you a tour.
Very good. Other comments, Judd? I agree with the point. I know it's in the woods. Does anybody else care about parking?
I would say if the spaces are already there,
Yeah. Whatever.
why not go with how many are there?
Okay. I'm okay with that.
If they were proposing to put them in, I would say, let's have fewer.
Yeah.
But since they're there, let's go with them.
Okay. Any other questions before I open up the public hearing?
I just have one, and I don't know, I'm not suggesting a change, but when I read this, I understand their plan is to renovate the first floor, 4 offices, kitchen, do the business on that. But the entire structure, 2 floors, is 2,500 square feet, correct? So as I read this, someone could tear that down, because I don't see anything about here being in the existing structure, and build out a 1-story, 2,500 square foot.
Right, I think the existing is actually the 2,100 something. The 25 was more just keeping consistent with that overlay district, and it
Right,
was
but somebody, because
Right.
it says 2,500 square, but someone could tear that down, build a 1-story.
correct.
Not suggesting you would, because in 30 years, you'll be probably not doing this. If you're lucky.
And we already spent all our money, so.
Right, well, maybe you will be doing this, I guess.
We're-
So I didn't know if it mattered. I don't know if restricting them to the existing structures, but, in theory, then someone could build a much bigger medical facility, 1-story, that wasn't just for counselors, because I didn't see in here
So
that you're limited to only 4 people operating in it.
I believe is the 2,100 square foot was just for the first
First floor.
floor.
Oh, so the total
that-
thing is
yeah,
4,200 square feet
Right,
Yeah,
it's,
you weren't factoring in the basement. at
right,
all.
it's limiting the
to 1
the
story.
area for the business, that's
Okay.
the
Yeah.
21.
That's why I didn't follow that. So that makes it a little bit, I was thinking that there was 1-story, 1,250.
Right,
Now someone
someone
could
not
flatten it and
double.
double okay. I feel better about that. Yep.
Just one more question. On the signage, you said you might have a sign up by the road. Do you have any idea? Again, Kyle mentioned the maximum on what we're looking at. Have you thought about that anymore? Yeah.
Yes, I do, and we've kind of been round and round. At one time, we wanted no sign, just so it was even more low key, but we're picturing just visible. So on the right, we have our mailbox, which says 163. So we're picturing a low, probably a wooden sign that just says Orono Counselor. And then once they're in the building, it will be a little sign that says welcome. But it needs to be big enough to be seen by a car, but no
Yeah.
bigger. We want it to be really
Low-key.
low key. We also
Yeah.
consider, could we have it in stone and have it carved out of a rock, like it look nice, but.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not gonna be like.
It's not gonna
this.
be neon or flashing.
Because people, part of it, the reason is when people are coming to counseling, the reason it's so important what it feels like, is for someone to do the work, for them to be able to tell us what's going on. They need a sense of emotional security and safety when they get there. That's why the sign is not,
Yeah.
it's just, here you are, come on in. What's going on?
Let's call for questions before I open it up. There we go. Open up the public hearing, and we do have somebody who's been patiently waiting.
Thank you. My name is Sherry Kinnison. I live at 165 Forest Avenue, which is the only neighbor, I guess you would call it, this business. And we just wanted to make comment on what our concerns are about this change in from going from low density residential to economic development zoning. We don't really have a lot of concerns with the business that Dara and Garrett have proposed going in, since it's really limited to the structure as it exists, and will be small and low key, and you probably will hardly know that they're there. I mean, we have a large buffer woods between us. When the Beatons lived there, I didn't even know I had a neighbor on that side of the house. So it's, you know, it's a very low key neighborhood. Very quiet out there. I own 19 acres of it. So it's where our concern more is something happening like what happened on Kelly Road, where they put in self-storage units, and somebody coming in after maybe Dara and Garrett are finished with their business or decide it's not working out for them, they will come in and put in that larger building, or clear cut to our property, or those kinds of things. I appreciate you bringing up the 15 spaces, but we don't have a concern about the parking per se. We think the way that they've outlined it and what they intend to do with the business is acceptable. Neighborhood. It is still a neighborhood. It is still residential up there, even though we're not a regular neighborhood. We're not like, you know, Mountain View Drive or anything like that, but we still our neighborhood out there. And our little section of like what I like to refer to as Middle Forest, because we're not in town and we're not outer forest, is very quiet and peaceful setting. It is very conducive to what Dara and Garrett want to do out there, because it is a very peaceful and serene setting, very natural. Bears might not like it if they're alone. But
So the size concern with Kyle's description and Judd's question,
yeah,
right now it's limited.
It's limited.
So
yeah.
did you have a chance to read the contract zone language? So it's limited to 2,500 square feet and medical offices. There's not a lot of wiggle room.
Right.
So you're concerned about self-storage units or something like that. That's not gonna happen.
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
just wanted to make it known that, because our concern is more that this contract will go with the property as opposed to with the project, right? So if somebody bought it, it would still be economic zone, and they would be opening it, that would be opening it up to larger development, right, beyond what they want. Is that
No,
correct?
so that would be the case if we didn't, but we specifically wrote into the contract agreement that the only economic development zone use allowed is the medical office up to that 2,500 square feet. No other economic development zone use would be allowed. So if someone were to purchase it after, the only thing they could do outside of what's allowed on the lot now would be that smaller scale medical office.
Okay.
Any self-storage, warehousing, R&D facility, whatever else is allowed in the economic development zone wouldn't be even allowed even at a small scale. It wouldn't be allowed. So
That makes us feel a lot better, being the neighbor.
Mhm.
and then, yeah, that runs with the property. So no matter who, for that contract to be changed, it would have to go through an amendment process where all abutting properties would get notified.
So that was our only comment that we wanted to make known.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we're fine and supportive of the business going in. We'd rather have something there than just a derelict building, which it has been for more than a year.
Mhm.
So
Okay, thank you. Anybody calling in?
Avi, do we have any public comments in the Zoom?
No comments online.
Thank you.
Very good. Further questions, comments?
Covered it all.
I don't have any other concerns with this. Last call for public comment. Avi, we have nothing.
Nothing.
Very good. Public hearing is closed. Again, we're tasked this evening with making a recommendation to council. There's no findings of fact or anything like that. We're just make a recommendation and then they're going to make the ultimate decision whether this moves forward or not. So I think we're ready. I mean, still need a motion and yeah, that formality.
So this is a formal motion. It's not just a, we recommend and take a vote.
Yeah, how are we going to do that process?
I think we can do a formal motion either with no recommended, you recommend well, if we want to include Krista's comment about looking into that piece about
Yeah, if we just highlight that and have our town attorney,
right, to get
Just
further
take it.
feedback.
yeah, take a closer look at that section. I have to.
Because that's really a generic comment, right? It's not, really- I mean, it is pertinent to this, but it's really.
Yeah.
So you do need a formal motion?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Please.
This is gonna be interesting. So I move that we recommend to the town council approval of the contract zone for 163 Forest Ave for a medical office use only. That is enough?
Yeah, with
With
the,
Krista's. You gonna find it for me there? With Krista's recommendation that we have our town lawyer look into the fact that neighbors can sue over the contract.
Yeah.
Zone.
I'm okay with that. We have a motion. That's well.
I'll second that.
Very good. Thank you, Lisa. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Good luck. That is correct.
So
Yeah.
one, technically, since Dave's not here, we could bring in one alternate to vote.
Yeah.
But it's also not.
It's your turn. You get it next time. There. All right. Well, so then, next up is third public hearing, draft land use ordinance amendment to amend the permitting process for mobile food vendors within the university district. Kyle, you're up again.
So this is probably the smallest ordinance amendment that's ever drafted. So a while back, we drafted ordinance language for mobile food vendors, to create a permitting process and standards for things like food trucks. In doing that, we kind of created two levels, mobile food vendor 1 and mobile food vendor 2, where ones were, it was giving food trucks an opportunity to go to a lot, a couple times here and there over the course of a year and just get a permit. If they were doing an event that was one time only, where they wanted to test out a location that they might decide, yeah, we will in fact operate here more consistently. And then they would have to move up to that mobile food vendor 2. And the mobile food vendor 2s were those, food trucks and things like that that were operating at a single location on a more consistent, regular basis. And the idea was to kind of treat those as we would treat like a smaller restaurant use or an accessory, restaurant use to another business. So those were then required to go through the planning board process. In doing that, we maintain that site plan review level for mobile food vendor 2s in the university district as well. But in sort of the months since we've adopted that ordinance language, I've had a few conversations with people in campus life at the university where they've just talked about things in the future where they might bring in food trucks over the course of a semester, every so often. And so it kind of got me looking at our land use table and how in other cases, certain uses in the university district are handled differently than other zoning districts in town. And that's, because the campus, when we're looking at site plan review, oftentimes what we're looking at is the impact on the surrounding area. But in the university's case, when you think of that 500-foot range for abutters, that's pretty much the campus itself. It engulfs all that. So when you look at things, other similar types of uses to a food truck, like a retail space or a restaurant, while those all require site plan review in other zoning districts in town, in the university district, they only require a permit. So the proposed change is to kind of match the consistency with mobile food vendors on campus to how we treat retail spaces and restaurants and other businesses like that on campus, where they don't have to come to the planning board for review, and they would just have to obtain a building permit. They would still be required to meet all of the standards of the mobile food vendor ordinance. So it'd be the same sort of documentation that they'd be providing in their application. It's just that it wouldn't be reviewed at the planning board level. And I thought that, yes, I thought that would be the reaction is if there was a case where, let's say, the university wanted to have 10 food trucks come at a time, and each one of those food trucks had to apply for their own permit, the board would have to review each of those individually, but they'd all pretty much be the same application, as it would all be taking place in the same area on campus. So, yeah, we thought this made sense for a lot of reasons. It kind of still kept the purpose and reviewing the criteria that we set out to review, but also made the process more efficient for both the planning board, the university, and the food truck operators.
Thank you. That's pretty simple. I appreciate the continued improvements to make our lives easier on the planning board, so that this one is.
Okay, I have a question. Looking at the use table on the university, it says P, which we've just been talking about,
Yes.
/S. So that would imply that site plan review might still be required in some cases.
Okay, so I didn't include footnote 2 there, which is an already
Yeah, he's
existing
looking for it.
Yeah, I should have included that. That's an existing footnote there that just says that whether it's permit or site plan is determined by the performance standard section. So when you go to the addition to the mobile food vendor section where it says any mobile food vendor 2 hosted by the university shall only be required to obtain a permit through the code enforcement officer. That's the reason I put it that way, is because it matches the format of other uses in the table.
Couldn't we just put a P instead of P/S?
The problem with that is there are other lots in the university district that don't meet the standards of that exemption. So
Oh,
there are
okay.
some lots in the
Otherwise it would-
university,
Okay,
right?
okay.
So some of the like fraternity houses and things like that along College Ave, the university might not be the one sort of sanctioning that food truck, but if we just put a P there, then anyone on College Ave,
Got it.
even not on campus, would be able to have a food truck just by getting a building permit. So that was the
Okay,
reason.
that makes good sense.
That's a good catch, Krista.
Yeah. Other questions? This is a public hearing, so I'm going to open it up to loads of comment, I'm sure. But, I'm going to open up the public hearing. You folks want to comment? You're here. Bang for the buck.
Sounds good.
Yeah, colleges need food trucks,
That's
and it's an
Yeah.
important part of the college student's diet.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sherry. Avi, do we have anybody on the line?
No comments online.
Really? Surprised. Okay. Anything?
They're all lining up for a food truck. That's not good.
Yeah. Last call out there. Close the public hearing. Again, we're making a recommendation this goes on to council. So same deal. Might as well go with a motion, please.
Someone else want to give a shot? I move that we recommend to the town council the amendment to the mobile food vendors section of the land use ordinance to exempt University of Maine from site plan review.
Second.
That sounds reasonable. Seems quicker. Any further discussion? You were voting last time, Bob. You get the deal this time. All right, all those in favor? Very good. All right, moving on. Other new business. Seeing none, we're gonna move on to discussion. Kyle, could you give us an update? What do we get to look forward to next month?
Sure, so we do have an application come in for the former bait farm on Taylor Road. Orono Economic Development Corporation has a sort of a change of use project there for the existing building, and they utilize the surrounding trails, everything. There isn't much development involved, so we're still reviewing all the materials that they sent in. But so far, that's the only thing. Really, applications for the August meeting should have been in by now. So unless it's something additional that's really small, that's probably all that'll be reviewed. So probably just meet for that in August. It'll be kind of a quick turnaround because the meeting came later this month. In September, we might have a bigger, somewhat bigger project to look at, but I'm not 100% sure on that yet. Some kind of smaller scale subdivision being talked about. So nothing like the student apartment complexes or anything like that. So but yeah, that's pretty much it. We are back to all the town council meetings and just town meetings in general are in person now. So we're for the time being going to be doing this format.
Okay. Thank you. Before we have adjournment, it is nice to see all you folks in person. It seems like we're slowly getting back to normal. So. Last up, adjournment. Can I get a motion, please?
Jen, I'll do a motion.
Nice. I move. You're all over.
We adjourn this moment.
Second. Well, come on now. Okay, thank you. Do we have a second?
Second here.
All right, any more discussion? All those in favor? See you next month.
Yes,